The Veth dropped out of the sky at 0317 station time, which was the kind of hour that made everything worse. Mira was still in the depot when the alerts fired. 3 short pulses, then a long one, which meant unscheduled atmospheric entry, which meant nothing good. She pulled her jacket off the hook, didn't bother with the second button, and stepped outside into the smell of ionized rain. The colony's lights were already cutting upward through the cloud cover, pale yellow cones catching nothing useful. She could hear the emergency tones echoing between the prefab walls of Harrow Station. 912 people. The closest Union military response 8 days out at best. She made it to the landing field just in time to watch the Veth scout ship bury itself nose first into the soft earth at the eastern boundary. It hit like a hammer. The ground shuddered. A wave of displaced mud rolled outward and sloshed over the runway lights, drowning them one by one. She expected screaming, she expected fire. Instead, she heard music. It was a Veth sound, low and rhythmic, something their vocal clusters produced when they were in what researchers called an elevated social state. Celebration, roughly speaking. The ship's main hatch blew outward at an angle, and the Veth came out into the rain in a loose, staggering group. 6, 8, a dozen of them. Their bioluminescent markings cycling through colors that had no human names. They moved through the mud and the wreckage with the absolute ease of beings who had decided, somewhere over the upper atmosphere, that they had already won. Mira watched from behind the fuel depot's blast wall, her hand on her radio, doing the math she didn't want to do. She called her brother on a private channel. "Cog, you awake?" A pause, then the slightly hoarse voice of an 11-year-old who had been awake for at least the last 4 hours regardless. "Define awake. The Veth are here, first scouts. Get down to the lab and lock the door." Another pause longer. "Which Veth?" "The kind that crash their own ship and then dance about it." "Oh," Cog said. "The augmented vanguard." She'd heard the term in briefings she wasn't supposed to have access to. Her brother had a gift for acquiring information from systems that discouraged access. The augmented vanguard were not standard Veth military. They were something the Veth had been refining for 3 decades. A forward unit pre-treated with a biological compound that, under specific atmospheric triggers, caused a rapid and catastrophic expansion of their cellular mass. It was an old idea dressed in new horror. You sent 12 soldiers who became 12 giants, and you let the math do the rest. She put the radio away and watched them move through the rain, still glowing, still producing that low harmonic sound that felt like a hand pressing gently on her sternum. By the time they reached the colony's main street, they were already starting to change. She could see it in the way their shadows fell wrong, the way their heads rose above the rooflines of the storage units. The compound activated slowly, which was, she realized, deliberate. They wanted to be seen doing it. By morning, they were 30 feet tall, and the first thing they did was put their hands around the relay tower and pull it apart like bread. Harrow Station had no military. It had a sheriff named Okafor who was 62 and had a bad knee, 2 deputies, and Mira, who had an engineering degree and a reputation for not knowing when to stop working on a problem. The Veth made their position clear in the way large things always do, by occupying space until no one could pretend they were not there. They moved through the station at a pace that suggested they were in no particular hurry. One of them, the largest, marked with orange bioluminescence that pulsed when it spoke, lifted the roof off the council hall and looked inside the way a person looks inside a box. The council members, to their credit, did not run. Mira noted this. People were capable of more dignity than they were usually given credit for when the situation was bad enough. The Veth leader, which Mira privately called the Orange One, set conditions. No weapons visible, no transmissions, no movement toward the colony's eastern fence. In exchange, no structural damage to residential units. The hostages. Sheriff Okafor and his daughter, taken from their home at 0600, would be returned when the Veth decided the colony was compliant enough. It was a good arrangement if you were very large. Mira spent most of that first day doing something that looked like compliance and was actually reconnaissance. She walked the main street with her hands visible, counted the Veth patrol patterns, watched how they moved and where their attention flagged. She noted that the augmented vanguard were not comfortable with their new size. She could see it in small ways, the way they misjudged distances, knocked things over with the backs of their hands, had to crouch and peer to read human-scale signage. The biology was right, the calibration was still adjusting. She filed all of this away and went home and talked to her brother through the locked door of his lab. The compound is biological, she said. They're not machines. Whatever they took is metabolizing. Synthesized polypeptide chain. Cog's voice came through the door, slightly distracted, which meant he was working. I've been running the spectral analysis from the ship's exhaust plume. The compound triggers an accelerated growth cascade in species with Veth-analogous cellular architecture. It's essentially irreversible under standard conditions. Essentially. Nothing's essentially anything. A sound of something being moved. Give me 48 hours. I'll give you whatever you need, Mira said. But I might need you to give me something first. She explained what she needed. There was a long silence. That, Cog said, is a very stupid idea. It's not a plan yet, it's a distraction. Oh, he said. Then it's a very stupid distraction. 48 hours, Mira said. She spent the night organizing the parts of the colony that could be organized. The Veth's prohibition on visible weapons was specific, and it gave her room. She talked to everyone she could reach without drawing attention. Yusuf from the vehicle bay, Priya from the water reclamation unit, the Delacroix family who ran the bakery and had, for reasons she'd never fully understood, an extensive collection of industrial fasteners. She talked to old Dr. Beaulieu, who had retired from exobiology and now grew vegetables, and listened to everything she said with the careful attention of someone who had spent a career taking improbable things seriously. You understand, Beaulieu said, over tea that Mira didn't drink, because her hands were shaking too much to hold the cup steady, that even if your brother solves the chemistry, you still have to get it to them. I know. They will be watching you specifically. That's the point, Mira said. They should be watching me specifically. She let herself be obvious about it. The next morning she walked out into the main square and looked directly up at the Orange One, who was crouched at the square's edge, in a posture that passed for resting among the Veth. Its bioluminescence was a slow, deep amber in the early light. I want to talk, she said, in standard Veth-adjacent trade pidgin, which she'd been learning for 4 years, and which she spoke with an accent she was told was endearing. The Orange One looked at her for a long time. Then it lowered its head to a height that was merely twice an old laurel tree's height, and made the sound that meant it was listening. She talked about the colony. She talked about what it had taken to build it, what it cost, how many of the 912 people living in it had come here with nothing, and made some from hard ground and cold seasons. She talked slowly, with care, picking each word. She watched the Orange One's attention fix on her, the way large things fix on small things that are still moving when they should have stopped. A kind of reluctant regard. She was still talking when Priya cut the power to the eastern fence. The next 4 hours were the longest of Mira's life. She knew what Yusuf and the others were doing because she'd designed what they were doing. She kept talking about trade agreements, about biological treaties, about the 6 other Veth first contact protocols she had memorized in case of exactly this category of situation. The Orange One had the focused expression of something that was both listening and waiting for the listening to be over. She heard once a distant metallic sound she recognized as the vehicle bay door. She didn't react. She kept her eyes up. She heard very faintly the sound of a bicycle. It was Cog who had insisted on the bicycle. She had suggested the electric cart. He had pointed out, with the patience of someone who has done all the math, that the electric cart would be too slow to maneuver in tight spaces and too loud to keep below the Veth's hearing threshold, and that a bicycle, which was a technology of such beautiful mechanical minimalism that it had survived 4 centuries without fundamental alteration, would do everything she needed. She hadn't argued. She'd learned not to argue with him about mechanisms. He came around the corner of the water reclamation building at low speed, a boy on a bicycle with a battered metal pail strapped to the rear rack, and a look of total concentration on his face that she recognized as the expression he wore when he was refusing to think about how afraid he was. The pail was sealed but for a ring of small holes around the lid's circumference, and from those holes rose a faint yellow vapor that drifted behind him in the still morning air, like smoke from a very small, very purposeful fire. The Veth at the square's southern corner saw him first. It moved toward him with the grinding certainty of something that did not expect to be outmaneuvered by a child on a bicycle, which was, Mira thought, the problem with very large things. They stopped imagining what small things could do. Cog didn't run from it. He turned toward it instead, which was wrong enough to be surprising, and he rode a tight circle around it, the bicycle leaning, his weight counterbalancing, with the easy instinct of someone who had ridden this same around the same colony buildings, since he was old enough to reach the pedals. And the yellow vapor spiraled out behind him and rose into the Veth's face, and she watched the Veth's bioluminescence stutter. She turned back to the orange one. "It's a reversing agent," she said. In plain human speech now, all the careful pigeon dropped. "For the growth compound. My brother synthesized it in 48 hours, from a spectral analysis and a chemistry kit that cost 400 credits. I want you to understand that before you decide what happens next." The orange one looked at her. Its amber pulsed once slow. "He's 11, Mira said. He's 11 years old, and he did that in a room with a locked door because that's just what humans do when you back us into a corner. We make things. We have always made things. You can be enormous, and we'll still make things, and eventually what we make will be exactly what we need." The Veth at the southern corner had dropped to one knee. The yellow vapor was still rising from cogs circling. Around the square, the other Veth were beginning to register it. She could see them tilting their enormous heads, their bioluminescent patterns shifting from the slow amber of rest toward the quick cycling silver that meant alarm and reassessment. They shrank slowly. It wasn't dramatic except that it was. Their vast outlines contracted like shadows at midday, pulling inward, the edges of them becoming human-adjacent in scale. Where they had towered they now simply stood. The orange one came down last, its amber light fading through yellow into white and then settling into a pale, ordinary glow that could have meant almost anything. They were still large, taller than any human, but the math had changed. Okafor was released from the storage unit where they'd been keeping him. He walked out under his own power, his daughter beside him, both of them squinting in the morning light. Mira watched him look at the shrunk Veth in the square, and she watched the expression on his face make several complicated journeys before arriving at something like exhausted satisfaction. "You want to explain what happened," he said to her. "Not right now," Mira said. Later, she agreed. She found Cog sitting on the front step of the lab, the empty pail between his feet, his bicycle leaning against the wall behind him. He was eating a nutrition bar with the methodical focus of someone who had forgotten to eat for approximately 2 days, which he had. She sat down next to him. "It worked," she said. "Obviously it worked," he said. "I did the math." She put her arm around his shoulders. He was too tired to pretend he didn't want that. "You were scared," she said. "I was terrified," he said. "That's different. Scared people stop. Terrified people do the math faster." The morning came on around them. The Veth in the square were being processed by Okafor's deputies with the careful efficiency of people who had discovered a new category of situation and were improvising procedures for it in real time. The relay tower would take 3 days to repair, which meant the Union response would take whatever it took. The colony had 912 people, a bad winter coming, and a relay tower in pieces. It also had this: the compound synthesis notes that Cog had kept in his precise, cramped handwriting, which he'd already transcribed to 3 separate storage drives and hidden in 3 separate locations. Because he was 11 and he had already understood, without being told, that the most important thing was making sure the knowledge didn't leave with him. Mira thought about Veth emerging from their wrecked ship in the rain, moving with the easy certainty of beings who had calculated the outcome before they'd landed. She thought about the moment when the math must have shifted for the orange one. When a boy on a bicycle became something that didn't fit the calculation, that was always the moment. It never looked like a victory when it was happening. It looked like a child refusing to stop pedaling. She took the nutrition bar from her brother's hand, broke off a piece, gave it back. He didn't complain. They sat together on the step while Harrow Station woke up around them, and the Veth who had come as gods prepared to leave as something considerably smaller. And the rain, which had started again, came down on everything equally.